is a big bun.
It's a very big bun.
Big fluffy bun.
It's a very big fluffy bun.
Where's the beef?
Some hamburger places give you a lot less beef on a lot of bun.
Where's the beef?
At Wendy's, we serve a hamburger we modestly call a single. And Wendy's single has more beef than the Whopper or Big Mac. At Wendy's, you get more beef and less bun.
Hey, where's the beef? I don't think there's anybody back there.
You want something better. You're Wendy's kind of people.
I know you fully anticipated in coming to church that you would get a Where's the Beef commercial. Yes, thank you. It's hard to believe it was almost 40 or roughly 40 years ago that those commercials came out. And I remember as a kid when those commercials came out, because there was a series of them, because typically as a kid you would hate watching commercials, but these I thought were especially good, and I really I thought they were funny. And so as those commercials would come out, though, you would look forward to them. And this lady, Clara Peller, the Where's the Beef lady, you saw her and you heard that expression and you knew exactly what she was talking about. That when you heard Where's the Beef, you knew that was talking about Wendy's. And it kind of became their motto for a while, didn't it? I mean, so when you heard Where's the Beef, and even today, if you hear somebody say 40 years later, Where's the Beef, those of you who are alive at that point and paying attention, you're aware that it was talking about Wendy's. It was kind of their motto. You know, in truth, there's a lot of companies, though, that have mottos, don't they? That when you hear a particular statement, you know who they're referencing. For example, if you hear the statement, you're in good hands, what do you hear? When in your mind, you're thinking about Allstate. When, for example, you're thinking about the Breakfast of Champions, you know that that's talking about Wheaties. When you hear the best a man can get, you think, what, Caroline. And so, no. No, but you think Gillette, right? And so you hear these mottos. You know that the quicker, thicker, picker-upper is Bounty. And it's because these companies become synonymous with that motto. And when you hear that statement, you know that it's talking about those particular individuals or that particular company. You know, there are lots of statements that begin to identify particular groups or groups of people where it kind of becomes their motto. And let me ask you this. If I were to say to you, or someone were to say to you, you know, I think that you're just kind of a Pharisee. When you hear that, would you think that to be a compliment? You know, and almost certainly you would say, no, I don't think that's a compliment. Somebody's not saying something that's praiseworthy to me. Now, this morning we're continuing a series that I'm calling Bad Religion, When Good Christianity Goes Wrong. And if you're at all familiar with the Bible and at all familiar with the stories of the New Testament, you know that the Pharisees were a group of very religious people. And while very religious, it wasn't in a very positive sense. And if someone were to say to you, hey, you're acting like a Pharisee, you realize that's not a compliment. But here's the thing. What exactly does that mean? What would it look like, or what would be true of me if I am acting as a Pharisee acted? I believe there's essentially some motto statements that a Pharisee would use that if we pay attention to those and evaluate ourselves through that lens, we can make sure that we're not operating in that way, that we're not characterized, that our motto is not one that would be said by a Pharisee. How can you tell if you're one of those? What might a Pharisee say? Look with me in your Bibles today to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23, we're going to begin reading with verse 1. Grab something over here real quick. Please ignore this. That was slick, wasn't it? Matthew 23, starting with verse 1, we're told that Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees, that they are seated in the chair of Moses. Therefore, do whatever they tell you and observe it, but don't do what they do, because they don't practice what they teach. They tie up heavy loads that are hard to carry, and they put them on people's shoulders, but they themselves aren't willing to lift a finger to move them. They do everything to be seen by others. They enlarge their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels. They love the place of honor at banquets, the front seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called rabbi by people. This is the beginning of a chapter that talks at length by Jesus, giving us some descriptions about how Pharisees operated. And so here again is our question. What types of statements would a Pharisee make? What would be their motto? Because you don't want those things to be said of. You don't want those things to be true of you as a follower of Christ. Based on what we see here, the first statement is this: rules are for you to follow. Rules are for you to follow. Now, at this point in Matthew 23, it's getting fairly late in the earthly life and ministry of Jesus. It's not going to be long before it's going to be the triumphant entry into Jerusalem. We're in the final stages of Jesus' earthly life and ministry. And as he has been going around and teaching, part of those that are gathered as he goes from place to place include a group of people known as the Pharisees. And it seems pretty clear in verse 1 of chapter 23, it says that Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples. While he's talking about the Pharisees, he's not talking to the Pharisees. And that kind of makes sense if you look at the end of chapter 22, where he's just had this encounter with them, and it seems that at that point they have just checked out from Jesus. They don't have any more interest in engaging him, in encountering him, hearing what he has to say. They've had enough. They are through with Jesus. And so at that point, they've kind of left the scene, and then you get to this entire chapter where Jesus is describing how Pharisees operated. Now, when you hear the term Pharisee, again, it's likely that that means something to you, even if you can't necessarily quantify it. But the Pharisees were a religious sect, and there were several Jewish sects that existed in the first century, and the Pharisees were the largest of the group. Now, keep in mind that the Pharisees had not always been around. They started around 160 BC, and so by the time this is being said, Pharisees as a group have been around for a couple hundred years. That being said, they've gotten very, very involved and entrenched in the life of an everyday Jewish person, because how it would work is this. The Pharisees were very, very familiar with and steeped in the law of Moses, steeped in the scriptures and the rules of the Old Testament. But while the laws of God and the rules that God gave, there were a lot of descriptions that he gave. There were a lot of things that the scriptures, that the laws didn't necessarily speak to. And so Pharisees were very quick to effectively come in and fill in the gaps. They were very quick to essentially say, well, you need to do those things, and we will specify with minute detail all the other things that you need to be doing. And so by the time you get to what's going on here with Jesus and his encounters with them, the Pharisees are very powerful, they are very influential, but most people probably didn't like them because Pharisees were kind of killjoys. You didn't probably have a positive view of them, and they would have been a group of people that they were known for their haughtiness, for their arrogance, for their pride, for their self-righteousness. These are people that would kind of walk around with their noses raised high in the air. And so by the time you get to verse 3 here, Jesus is not simply talking about the Pharisees, but he's encouraging, I don't want you to operate this way. You don't want to be this way. And then he begins to describe how they operate. And so how they operate in this entire chapter, I think you can divide them into some broad categories. And the first category, again, is this, that rules are for you to follow. Now, the Pharisees loved rules, and it seems that what they had done was effectively to take the sacrifice of the Old Testament to minimize sacrifice and to maximize rules and obligations. And where the law of Moses did not give specificity, they would add regulations and they would add stipulations. And while it was that they loved rules and seeking to impose those on others, Jesus notes something about them. Notice it in verse 3. He says, don't do what they do, because, he says, they don't practice what they teach. Now, these are people who love rules, who love imposing boundaries and restrictions on people, but they don't follow those rules themselves. Rules are for you to follow. As for me, I'm a rule giver. I'm a standard maker, but I don't have to actually follow that myself. Now, when Jesus says this, when he's saying that they are operating with effectively the cliche, do as I say, not as I do, what is his aim in saying this? What is the aim of Jesus in saying this is how this group of people operates? I think the aim is to appeal to the natural human response to someone operating that way. And so let me ask you this. Just as a person, you don't have to be a person of faith, you don't have to be a person that professes to have a relationship with Jesus, but pretty much anybody, anywhere. If you said this, hey, you've got somebody who wants to give rules for other people, but they don't want to follow themselves, how do you feel about that? People would say, no, I can't stand that. I think that's ridiculous. I think that's hypocrisy. I think that's unjust. I think that's unfair. And when Jesus says that about the Pharisees, he's saying, hey, that's how they operate. They want to raise the standards. They want to raise rules all the time for you to follow. But as for themselves, it doesn't make any difference whether I do that or not. Now understand that we don't like that. You don't like that. You don't want to see somebody at work. You don't want to see somebody at school. You don't want to see anyone in life who is effectively saying, you need to do this, but as for me, I don't have to. You don't want to do that. What I want you to realize, though, is that it's very easy for us to fall into that trap. It just is, even with small things. Let me give you an example. All right, so we've been in this COVID pandemic now for what, was it 10 years, I think? And so it seems like it's going on forever, and about the time it looked like everything was getting normal again, then the bottom falls out and the rates have gone through the roof again. But one of the things that we have done as a church, one of the statements that we have used, certainly in the height of the pandemic over the past year, was this: if you're sick at all, do not come at all. And that wasn't just something that we would say and a standard that we would put out, but that's kind of how everybody in society was operating. In your workplace, if you were sick at all, they didn't want you to come at all. Once school went back in person, if you were sick at all, no one wanted you to come there in person at all. And so we would say that. And like if you're at work and somebody shows up and they are sniveling and sneezing and coughing and hacking, what are you thinking? That scoundrel's going to give us all COVID. I mean, we're going to get sick, all of us, because that bum decided to come to work, or that punk decided to come to school, or whatever it is. We would get frustrated by them because they showed up sick. Because if you're sick at all, don't come at all. But how many of you over the past year, maybe it was going to work, maybe it was going to school, maybe it was coming to church, maybe it was that you woke up one day and you had you had this tickle in your throat, this scratch in your throat, and you just didn't feel great. And you had a cough, but you told yourself, well, I just have allergies. Or no, I just have a cold. Or I just have I just have a runny nose. And so many times what we will do is this. We'll say what I have is of no consequence, and it's okay for me to be going about like normal. But if you have it, well, you better stay at home because I don't want to get anything from you. What I'm saying is that very easily as people, we can operate with a double standard, where we can say rules and standards, they're for you to follow, but as for me, I don't have to follow them myself. Now, that's how Pharisees operated. And we're not talking about COVID stuff, but we're talking about with expectations and standards and boundaries for life. And so they wanted to celebrate and raise high the banner of standards and rules and limitations, but they just want to make sure that you follow them. Whether I did, well, that doesn't really matter. Is that something that we can do today? It absolutely is. If you're someone that professes to be a follower of Jesus, it is the case that He has given standards for us that He wants us to operate within. And as we share those, we need to be mindful of this, that what I'm saying the standard of God is for others, it's also true for me. Because a Pharisee says, rules, they're for you to follow. And based on what Jesus is communicating here, you don't want to be a Pharisee. That was one of their mottos, but there's another motto that they had effectively, which is this: you must decrease so I can increase. You must decrease so I can increase. All right, so Jesus says the Pharisees, they want to impose a lot of restrictions on people to make the entire experience of living burdensome and weighty, well, at least for others. And they want to make standards and erect standards for others to follow, but what are they going to do? Well, as far as themselves, they're not going to do anything. And he says in verse 4, he says, they tie up heavy loads that are hard to carry, and they put them on people's shoulders, but they themselves aren't willing to lift a finger to move them. All right, before going further, I want to be very clear about something. I am not seeking to communicate at all that God doesn't want us to operate within some bounds. He's given us a lot of standards that He's given for our good. Do this, don't do this. Pursue this, avoid that. Stay away from this, do not do this, do not engage in that. There's a lot of rules that He's given us that He wants to follow, and He's given those rules to us for our good. But the Pharisee says, someone who's operating like a Pharisee wants to celebrate those rules, but says, you need to do that, this is what you need to do, but they themselves aren't necessarily following them. Beyond that, it's like they're going to heap more stipulations, more limitations, impose greater restrictions on you, such that, he says, it's like they're tying up heavy loads that are hard to carry. And maybe you've seen some photos or some videos of, in particular, some third world countries where you've got individuals maybe that have gathered sticks for firewood, and these massive, massive loads of sticks that are on their back. And you're like, how can a person carry that? That's how Pharisees were operating. It's like, let me add something else to your list. Let me add something else that you can't do. Let me add greater specificity so that you can't even do this, that, or the other. And they wanted to erect those standards, but he says they're not willing to help people with that. I just want to beat you down with a rule, but then he says, in verse 5, they do everything to be seen by others. And then this also comes within the context of verse 6 where he says they love the place of honor at banquets, the front seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and they love to be called by these titles. What is it that he's seeking to communicate? Why is he talking about all these public demonstrations with the imposition of rules on people? I believe the answer is this, that Pharisees loved imposing restrictions on and kind of clubbing others with rules and standards that they weren't having to abide by. Rules that they're for you to follow. And I can do that and club you with these rules, club you with these restrictions, because by saying and by erecting these standards, that makes me look like I am more serious. That makes me look like I am more pious. That makes me look like I am more religious. Whether or not I do it or not, that's of no concern. But it's going to make me look better. It's going to make me look like I have my act together more, that I have my I's dotted and my T's crossed. Because Pharisees, they weren't interested in actually doing the right for the right's sake. They were interested in being seen. They were interested in affecting and controlling the perception of others. They were interested in making other people think, oh, they are so blessed, wonderful. That's how Pharisees operate, and Jesus is saying, listen, don't be a Pharisee. Because they operate this way. Rules, they're for you to follow, and they want to impose greater restrictions on you because the goal would be, I want to make you feel a little less. I want to kind of beat you down because in the process, that makes me look a little bit greater. That makes me look like I am more spiritual. That makes me look like I have my act together to a greater degree. I'm going to make you less, and in doing so, that makes me more. When Caroline and I got married, traditional wedding, traditional wedding attire. I had a tux on. She had a wedding dress on. I had typical dress shoes on, but Caroline wore essentially, it was effectively a bedroom slipper. Not like the ones that some of you might wear to Walmart, not that type, but this little footy thing that essentially had no sole, and were just really, really thin. And on the surface, that sounds kind of strange because, I'm wearing a tux, she's wearing this bridal gown. A wedding is a formal occasion. This is not a casual event. And so why in the world would she have those little footies on, those little essentially slippers on? Well, it was very simple. It's because she didn't want in the pictures to be taller than me. Because if we're both barefoot, actually if we're both barefoot, she's probably pregnant. And so, but if we're both barefoot, she is about a ½ inch taller than me. And so for our wedding, I'm wearing typical dress shoes for a guy. So there's a heel on the back of it about, ½ to 3/4 of an inch. And if she's wearing something that is essentially soleless, is paper thin, then that's going to make her less, and it's going to make me more. That's how someone operating with the spirit of a Pharisee wants to operate. They want to operate in such a way where they make themselves greater. And to do that, they've got to make you somehow less. They've got to take you down. And how they can do that is with rules that they want to impose on you, but they're not willing to follow themselves. Is this something that followers of Jesus can engage in? Absolutely it is. And we can get to a point where we are priding ourselves because, man, we're raising the banner and erecting the standards and celebrating the standards, but we want to make sure that you do that. Well, man, I can't believe these people aren't doing this, and look how horrible they are, and all these things. The Pharisee wants to do that because it makes them feel better. Why? Because they're not following the rules themselves. Because the aim is, you decrease so I can increase. But there's a final motto that we see in Jesus' words that he gives here, and that's this: books are best judged by their covers. Books are best judged by their covers. Look with me towards the end of the chapter, starting in verse 25, where Jesus says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup, so that the outside of it may also become clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You're like whitewashed tombs, which appear beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of the bones of the dead and every kind of impurity. In the same way, on the outside, you seem righteous to people, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." At this point, to help drive the point home, Jesus is using some illustrations that people could pretty easily identify with. And imagine that you're going over to somebody's house, and let's say you're going to have dinner with them, and you sit down, and they give you a bowl that they haven't put food in, but the outside of the bowl is clean. I mean, it's spotless. There's not even water spots on the outside. But on the inside, there is the dried residue of the vegetable soup that they had a few weeks ago. So you got all that kind of red crust on there with maybe a dried carrot stuck to it. Now, if they sit that down in front of you and they get ready to scoop something into that bowl, what are you going to say? Probably you're going to say, well, I think there might be a little something in this bowl. Why would you say that? Because you would realize this bowl is not clean, and it doesn't matter if the outside is clean if the inside is nasty. In the same vein, Jesus likens the Pharisees to that, and he says that you're concerned about the outside, and you're going to dress up to go to the synagogue, to go to the temple, and you're going to look like from a distance as though everything is okay, but on the inside, man, it's really rough. And then he goes on to describe that it's like a tomb. And it's likely you're aware of how the burial process would have worked in the first century. And that is that someone would have died, they would have been wrapped in burial cloths, put in a tomb, which is kind of like a cave, and they would it would be covered. Typically, like for example, you're aware with the burial of Jesus, a stone would have been rolled over that. And so you have a body that's wrapped in burial cloths and with oils and spices to help initially, but what begins to happen? Well, the process of decomposition begins to go on. And so with a tomb, the outside of it may look great. You can put flowers, and you can maybe put a little bench out there, and you can have shrubbery, and you can have all sorts of niceness on the outside, but on the inside of that tomb, there's some really ugly, nasty things that are going on as that body is decomposing, as that body is rotting. And Jesus says, to these Pharisees, he's saying, this is how you guys are. On the outside, everything looks nice, but on the inside, it is nothing but decay and rot and decomposition. And he says that you are full of every kind of impurity, and on the outside you seem righteous to people, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. When I was 18 years old, I went for the only time that I've ever been to any of the Disney parks or any of the stuff down in Orlando. And I don't remember which one it was, because I think we went to Disney and Epcot and Universal and MGM. And I don't remember which of these it was at, but one of them, there's a little tour that you can go on where there's like a back lot where they have done some filming, and maybe even in some cases, I don't know if it's changed now since in all these years, but I think maybe it was at Universal, but you're going on this tram ride, and they're pointing out some stuff, and here's where this is going on, and this is where this has been recorded. And we go down this one road, and it looks like a neighborhood street. And as we're going along on this tram ride, the tour guide says that this house over to your right, that may look familiar to you because that's the house that you see in Golden Girls. And because most of you are carnal, I know that you have seen episodes of Golden Girls, but I'm just joking. Anyway, but you likely are familiar if you were around back in the mid to late 80s and early 90s when that show came on. And of course, it was a house set to look like it was recorded in Miami, but this is the house that you would see in that video footage. But the interesting thing about it is that it was just the front of the house. The house didn't have a back. It actually didn't have rooms. It didn't actually have a kitchen. All it was an outside shell, just from the front. Jesus says about people that operate like Pharisees, that's how they operate. They're concerned about the outside. It seems that the motto they're operating on is this: books are best judged by their covers. And if I can control how others perceive me from the outside, it doesn't make any difference what's really going on the inside. Jesus says, listen, it should not be that way. Hopefully you're aware, and if someone were to say to you, man, you're really acting like a Pharisee, are they complimenting you? Absolutely they're not. It's not a compliment in the 21st century. It wasn't a compliment in the first century. And it's because the motto, the rules that they operated with were rules are for you to follow. That books are best judged by their covers, and I need to somehow make you less so that I can make myself more important so that I can increase. Why does this matter? Why am I even spending time to talk about this today? Why is this of consequence? Well, the reason is this. Pharisees were interested only in exterior appearances. Jesus best described it this way. He says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They look like everything is okay when inside there are real problems. Does that happen today? Sure it does. I remember years ago having to do a funeral for a man that on the day he died, it was found out that he was a bigamist and had a wife in 2 different states. But from the outside, from a distance, boy, this joker seemed like he had his act together. But on the inside, turns out it was fraud and deception. Jesus is saying that's how Pharisees work. Don't be a Pharisee. The statements, the mottos that ought to characterize us are these: that I want Jesus to make a difference in my life so that I'm a follower of His consistently. Whether other people notice, whether they are paying attention, that is not my ultimate concern. But as His follower, He's given me standards that He wants to follow that are for my good, and that He is interested not simply on the outside, but He's interested on making a difference for me and in me from the inside out. That's the motto of somebody that's serious about following Jesus. But that's not a Pharisee. Jesus' encouragement for you, for me, is this: don't be a Pharisee. Will you bow your heads with me? Let me ask you, just very simply, first of all, would you say that you have a personal relationship with Christ? Would you? I mean, do you feel like you can say that with confidence? If the answer is no or I don't know, let me say this: we want to help you with that. And if you're here today in person, we'd love to share that with you. If you'll find me, if you'll find Jamie afterwards, I promise you we'll give you as much time as you would like so that you can get the answers to the questions that you have and experience a real, meaningful difference. A difference that Jesus can make, not simply where you look good on the outside, but where He changes you from the inside out. If you would say, Michael, I've already made that decision. I know that I'm a follower of Christ. Let me just tell you that while the Pharisees as a group don't formally exist today, in truth, they're still very common. They can be found even in this room. Maybe you would say they could be found in your seat. That some of these statements typify what's been going on in your heart and mind. Let me ask you, not simply do you honor or celebrate or vocalize the standards that God has given, The question is, do you practice them yourself? I mean, is there consistency in what you say and what you purport to stand for and what you actually do? Listen, if there's not, that's a problem. That needs to change, because that's how Pharisees operate. That's someone that's operating religiously but in vain. Do you, in your relationships with others, do you talk about rules because, even though you may not admit this vocally, on the inside you realize that you erecting standards and reminding others around you of standards, that makes you feel good? You're not willing to help somebody, but you like to use rules as a club because it makes you feel somehow superior. At the end of the day, the attitude that I need to have is the one that John the Baptist had, where he said of Jesus, "I must decrease so that he might increase." It's not about making me better. It's about demonstrating the greatness of Jesus in my life. And let me ask you this, even with respect to your connection with this church, do you spend more time preparing the outside of you or the inside of you? Do you spend more time thinking about your outward appearance or what's going on the inside? Let me just tell you, if it's more on the outside than the inside, it's a problem. That's how Pharisees operated. And Jesus doesn't want me, He doesn't want you to operate that way. Listen, these changes that need to be made, they can be made starting today. But it's going to take some honest confession. It's going to say, Lord, this is where I am. You've helped me to see it, but I want you to help me to change that. I don't want to have vain lip service. I want to have a meaningful, real walk with you. I want you to just take a moment right where you are as Karen's playing. The Lord's speaking to you and encouraging you to say that to Him. Will you say that to Him today? If you want to kneel at this altar, if you want someone to pray with you, we'll be glad to do it. But as He is speaking to you, will you respond to Him now?